collaboration between Bain Empirically, which I co-founded with Mike Gold, and a lot of really amazing people, 4 of whom are sitting to my right. So we're just going to get right into it and talk about the importance that community plays in developing open source startups. And let's just start with like an open-ended question. What does community mean to you in your role, and why should it be on the minds of every founder who's starting an open source startup?
You want to say that
Go
one?
ahead, to my right.
Hi, so I'm Chrisitian. I'm from Datastax, and really there would be no Datastax without open source community. It is that important to us, and the way that we structured our company is there is a commercial side and there's the open source side, and it's sort of checks and balances. But really, the community is such a driver for us, and we spend so much time nurturing and helping them. There really would be no commercial Datastax entity without the open source community.
I think as a representative of NGINX, I'm Sarah Novotny. NGINX would be an internal piece of software in a very large Russian company that runs search. If it weren't for the community, it was the fact that this bit of code was brought out further into a community who then found it compelling enough to translate language, or translate all the documentation from Russian into many, many other languages that gave us the adoption over the last 10 years. We've only been a company and having a commercial product in the last 18 months or so. So NGINX would exist as a little bit of proprietary internal code if it weren't for the community.
I'm John Mark from Redhat. I've been the Gluster community leader for the last 3 years. I come at this with the opinion that open source communities are fundamentally different from other communities. Open source communities, the thing about open source is that it's pulled by customers. A lot of people think it's led by developers. I disagree with that. I think actually it's customers and users that made open source what it is. And they were able to do that because the nature of open source is that every player has kind of an equal stake in the game. And so it really changes that dynamic. In some companies that are proprietary, there's this one-way avenue of information exchange. In an open source community, it's multi-path. Everyone has a stake. Everyone can be a player at the table and sort of exert influence over the direction of the community. And so at Redhat, we take that to heart. We work with a lot of different open source communities, a lot of different open source projects. And we also happen to make great products that based on those. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to the innovation that happens in the community, because I think as a direct result of the fact that everyone is sort of an equal player in the game.
Great, I'm Diane, and I'm at Mozilla, and I agree with everything that's been said. For Mozilla, in the case of Mozilla, we were started by a group of people who were technical but also business oriented, and a community of people that really saw the need for a browser that was not dominated by a corporation. So there was definitely a lot of buy-in outside of the people starting the project. So that was our community, and it consisted not only of developers, but of people that just wanted to support us. So one of the first things that Mozilla did when we launched Firefox 1 was take an ad out in the New York Times, and we reached out to the community to finance the ad. So people could participate in the launch without having to write code. So in fact, it was so popular that we wound up doubling the size of the ad and listing absolutely everybody who's named their name who participated in financing the ad. So community takes on a number of forms at Mozilla beyond coding. It's marketing, evangelism, outreach, localization, documentation, a number of different things.
And how do you get all these people to do what you want them to? Or does it work the other way around?
The other way around. Exactly. So just like you were alluding to at Redhat, it's a two-way, it's a collaboration. So we really like to work with people in terms of what they're passionate about, what they're gifted at, what they can contribute. And Mozilla does have a structure. It's called a module ownership structure, so it's not pure chaos. Things do have to ship, things do have to get done. So there is sort of a governance in place, but at the same time, it's definitely a contributive, collaborative effort, and it's shaped by everybody involved.
Your work product is your vote. Just just do what needs to be done, contribute to the community, involve yourself in it, and as Diane said, there are so many ways beyond just code.
Yeah, there's the whole concept of community equity that you build up over time because of the things that you contribute. A lot of people will want to drop in and create this huge document about stuff that the community should do, and everyone will ignore that person because who are they? Who cares? Oh, they haven't been there, day to day doing stuff. So, are we actually going to disagree here, or is this going to be a love fest? Which is fine, by the way.
I think you should show up and troll.
That happens in communities.
Well, let's talk about the difference between building a community as an open source startup as opposed to an open source project. I think that one of the interesting ideas behind being an open source startup with a really active community of contributors is that there's an interesting matrix of incentives, and not everybody shares the same one. Sarah, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So as far as I look at these things, open source communities can exist in a couple of different ways. They can grow very organically from the start of it's an idea and then my friends play with it and then it grows outward. Or you can have companies who start with an open source piece of code. And I differentiate between open source code and an open source project because you are missing the community if it's just open source code. So open source code is fundamentally some code, it does some cool thing, it's got an open source license attached to it. Great. That's very different from an open source project, which has that community. And an open source startup starts with an idea, starts with code, starts with a license, and then has to find the community, has to find that voice, has to find that contribution. And we're lucky at NGINX, we flipped it. We found the community and the project first, and we've built the company around that and are figuring out how to make that shift